Please.
Shahadi.
My lady, our next witness is Jonathan Irvine. Please, can he be sworn or affirmed?
After me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Okay.
Can you state your full name for the record, please?
Yes, my full name is Jonathan Paul Irvine.
Thank you. You have provided two witness statements to the inquiry. I'm going to read out their document reference numbers. They are INQ 000536425 and INQ 000575089. Are the contents of these statements true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. In a moment, we're going to be exploring the role of NWSSP. Before we get on to that, if we can address your professional background, is it right that you are the Director of Procurement Services at NWSSP?
Yes, that's correct.
And you took up this role in 2019, so that means you were in post during the pandemic, is that right?
That's correct.
And can you give us a brief overview of your own professional background?
Of course, I've been just over 36 years in NHS procurement. I started and spent the majority of my career working in NHS procurement for health and social care in Northern Ireland. Most of that time working for BSO, Procurement and Logistics Services. I ended working there at a senior level. In the last number of years, I've worked in Great Britain at Nottingham University Hospitals NHS Trust at a senior level in procurement before moving to my present role and taking up post at the end of September 2019.
Thank you. Now, some of our previous witnesses have touched upon what NWSSP is. Can you explain to us in simple terms what it is and what it does?
Yes, so NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership, or NWSSP, is an organisation that isn't a statutory body in its own right, but it is an integral part of the NHS in Wales. And as such, it is hosted by Velindre University NHS Trust as the statutory hosting body. We've been in operation since approximately 2011, and we have 2,400 staff employed and a further 3,600 staff under what's called single lead employers, which is trained doctors coming into the system who nominally work for NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership at the outset. We operate through a Shared Services Committee, and that committee has representatives from each of the NHS Wales health organisations, including health boards, trusts and other NHS organisations. So what we do and how we operate is directed through that committee. My managing director is the accountable officer for the Shared Services Organisation and is accountable to the NHS Chief Executive in Wales, Judith Paget, and he is also dual accountability into the Velindre Trust Board for any issues that fall within their remit. And then within our own Shared Services organisation, we have a senior leadership group that comprises all of the divisions within Shared Services. So while this inquiry's obvious focuses on procurement, Shared Services as an organisation provides shared services across a range of common areas of operation in support of NHS Wales, ranging from audit services, medical examiner services, employment services, and many other services as well, all of which are listed in my witness statement.
Yes, thank you. I wonder if we could take a look at the organogram, which provides a further explanation. We have it on screen. I'm very grateful. So we can see there what seems to be a slightly complex web of arrows and so on, but shared services partnership right at the bottom in the middle there, helpfully highlighted. I'm very grateful. That is where NWSSP falls. And as you've described, just above it, there's the Velindre NHS Trust, which you describe as hosting NWSSP. And then we see an arrow coming down from Welsh Government. Does that denote accountability as between Velindre NHS Trust and the Welsh Government?
Yes, so there is accountability directly into Welsh Government for some of our activities that fall outside of Velindre NHS Trust itself. But all of our work is accountable through the Shared Services Partnership Committee itself that I've described. I think it's important to point out that this organisation chart isn't an NWSSP creation. It's a chart that has been provided by another Welsh Government organisation. And so there are some nuances within it in terms of the arrows, which maybe aren't just 100% accurate.
So we have an arrow there that joins up Shared Services Partnership and local health boards. It's in orange, which according to that key would refer to funding. Would you like to put that into context?
Yes. So as being hosted by Velindre NHS Trust, NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership receives funding obviously through the allocation that Velindre Trust itself receives from Welsh Government. We also receive some funding directly from Welsh Government and have done in the past, as in particular, PPE, for example, but that goes through the Velindre Trust ledger. In terms of the funding relationships with local health boards, in respect of funding going out of shared services to the health boards, that is in respect of any surplus on our operational budget that we may end up with at year-end, financial year-end. We always break even, so any surplus that we have is distributed back to the health boards. However, what is missing from the chart, is an arrow coming back from the health boards, a funding arrow into Shared Services Partnership, which would cover specific health board requirements, individual health board requirements often for specific services that we provide on a health board or trust by trust basis to them.
There we are. Someone's added that in for us very helpfully. Thank you very much. I don't think we need this diagram anymore, so that can come off the screen. You mentioned there that you break even. Is the idea that NWSSP sources services, but we're concentrating on physical items, in particular PPE, and provides them on to health boards and trusts, but doesn't make a profit?
That's correct.
And can you just clarify whether those items are simply transferred free of charge or whether they're effectively bought by NHS trusts from NWSSP and health boards?
They would be bought, in terms of our stock, they would be bought at the price, that's at the stock price.
So bought at the same price at which NWSSP bought them in the first place?
Yes.
Understood. NWSSP also is responsible for distribution and warehousing and logistics of those items. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You've explained how NWSSP is run. In terms of provision for the NHS in Wales, is it correct that NHS bodies, organisations, health boards are free to buy or procure their own items outside of the offering of NWSSP?
No. The arrangement that was put in place whenever shared services was established and procurement services was obviously brought in its entirety over a period of a few years into shared services, the expectation of Welsh Government and indeed the NHS in Wales is that all procurement activity comes through my teams within Shared Services, Procurement Services Division.
So at the time that the pandemic hit our shores, NWSSP was already set up to be supplying the NHS in Wales.
Yes, the only exceptions to that might be in the areas of continuing healthcare, where health boards would potentially procure, in some cases, their own contractual arrangements with healthcare services providers. But apart from that, we influence or manage the vast majority of expenditure within NHS Wales.
And to be clear, does that exclude community health, GP surgeries, and so on? Did they, prior to the pandemic, fall outside of the remit?
Yes, for the most part, there were some limited work. There was some limited work that we did on behalf of GPs, such as my health courier services teams would be involved in the transport of blood tests or transfer of medical records, but it was a limited services pre-pandemic.
And the remit of NWSSP was widened during the pandemic to provide PP for the social care sector. Similarly, before the pandemic, NWSSP was not sourcing equipment, supplies, services for the care sector. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, in terms of pandemic preparations, we'll come on to the PIP stockpile in a moment, but NWSSP had in place a pandemic plan, didn't it?
Yes.
All right, could we display, please, INQ 000506695? Thank you very much. We have it there on screen. It's dated 2016. And the basic point, I suppose, is that your organisation had anticipated that its business as usual activity would be disrupted in the event of a pandemic, hadn't it?
Yes.
And can I ask that we go to page 14, please? Thank you very much. We see there at paragraph 6.5.2, middle of the page and onwards, that the plan anticipated that some of the impacts would be complaints or queries, change in product service demand for key items. You may think that's an understatement looking back at your experience. Both increases and decreases, demand for alternatives, price increases, and you had anticipated, or your predecessor had anticipated, that pharmaceuticals, oxygen, food, aprons, cleaning materials, gas and so on might be impacted. If we go over the page to page 15, that list goes on. We see it there, including gowns, disposable sterile gowns, masks, and consumable medical items. So it was anticipated that there would be shortages, spikes in demand, and so on. Can we go to page 11, please, the same document? We see here that part of the plan was to put in place the control centre team, and they would cascade effectively plans and instructions on to the rest of the team. There were plans in place, but ultimately NWSSP was going to await direction from Welsh Government, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
And the plans themselves really refer to communications, to work streams, to ways of working, as opposed to changing supply chains, concrete plans of what would be done, what items would be sourced, and so on.
Yes, that's correct. And in the context of the COVID pandemic, it's important to point out that obviously this is a flu response plan. It was in 2016. And it was probably, although I cannot speak for my predecessor, but it was probably put in place as a necessary document to support our experiences with swine flu and SARS earlier in the 2000s. So I think it needs to be looked at in that context as opposed to what happened completely during the COVID pandemic.
Certainly. I think we can put that document away now. NWSSP obviously took over the role of replenishing the stockpile of carrying out emergency procurement. In terms of pandemic preparedness planning now, is NWSSP working on more detailed plans that take into account concrete steps of what you might do in the event of supply chain disruption?
Yes, absolutely. And through my witness statements, there's references to the development of our planning since the onset of the COVID pandemic through the PPE winter plan and longer term plan. And that isn't an independent NWSSP planning process. It's very much contingent and in collaboration with Welsh Government and what their requirements are in terms of things such as stock holding and the product range and product types that we need to stock, and indeed wider UK pandemic planning and how that impacts on Wales and then on the NHS in Wales and our own plans.
In total, there were some 35 contracts awarded, 33 which were performed, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And can I just ask you, looking back, did supply chains for items such as masks and gowns and aprons, PPE that was used in the pandemic, did they need to be more diverse than they were in order to withstand the demands of the pandemic?
I think the availability of PPE was very much nuanced in relation to the particular PPE product that you were referring to. We took our direction in NWSSP as a procurement organisation from the specifications and the types of PPE products that we were asked to procure. But you are correct, the ability of the supply market globally, never mind domestically, to provide products, suitably certified products of the right quality, meeting all of the regulatory requirements, was very limited. So globally, buyers across the world were chasing a very small number of manufacturers who could provide such good quality product, particularly early in the pandemic. And then, as we've heard in the inquiry already on a number of occasions, some products such as the FFP3 respirator mask was very much determined by the fit with the user. So the diversity of masks was only a function of how well it could fit individual members of staff who would be wearing it. So I think those would be the factors that would impact on diversity. But yes, straight answer to your question, if there was a wider range of suppliers globally who could provide those suitably certified products, then obviously it would have been a less challenging proposition to acquire them.
And what about suppliers based in Wales? Would a combination of Wales-based suppliers and suppliers based abroad have provided greater resilience, do you think?
Yes, and on that point, there is a positive story coming out of Wales. So Wales did procure PPE from locally based manufacturers who were repurposing their manufacturing to provide PPE such as visors. And while I know it's not a product as part of the inquiry's reference to PPE, but hand sanitizer is another product that was used widely in the pandemic that was produced in large quantities by companies in Wales. And I think having a mix of domestic and international sources is helpful. I think one thing to bear in mind, respectfully bear in mind, is that while there might be a local or UK manufacturing facility or opportunity for PPE, you have to be mindful what the restrictions on that might be in terms of the availability of the raw materials, which themselves may have to come from offshore. So while we may be able to manufacture, the availability of the raw materials to get to the finished product might still be challenging.
Yes, so you can't entirely avoid the consequences of global supply chains collapsing.
I don't believe so.
I'm going to move on to ask you about the PIP stockpile. Now, is it correct that the procurement of items in the PIP stockpile was carried out by Welsh Government as opposed to by NWSSP?
Yes, that's correct.
Is it also correct that NWSSP, however, was responsible for managing and storing the PIP stockpile?
Yes, we are responsible for that.
You explain in your witness statement that initially the stockpile was kept at an RAF facility,
Yes.
but it was then moved to Pixton Bro Thathen site,
Yes.
and that you say that had 3,200 pallet spaces, and you say it had minimal floor space.
Yes.
Did that minimal floor space cause issues when the time came to distributing the items in the stockpile?
No. The facility itself was dedicated to the wider emergency planning stockpile, and the PIP stockpile itself was obviously wider than PPE, including medicines and medical consumable products. So while it was a smaller space, it was purposely there specifically for that reason, so it didn't cause any particular problems.
Just a few points to clarify your last answer, if I may. So it was a smaller space, and is your evidence that that smaller space didn't make it harder to physically access the stock?
No, it didn't.
And when you say it was part of the wider emergency planning, are you referring to preparations for the UK exiting the European Union?
No. So the PIP stockpile, I know the inquiry certainly seems to focus on the PPE element of that, which is a significant part of the PIP stockpile, but the PIP stockpile in its widest sense includes other products such as medicines and medical consumables that are perceived to would be required in the event of a pandemic. So all of those products under that definition of PIP were kept in that same place. In terms of the Brexit stockpile, we, through the acquisition by Welsh Government of our main, what is now our National Distribution Centre warehouse in Newport, our Brexit stockpile was put together and held at that location.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Now, in terms of management of the items in the stockpile, we've discussed that fell within the remit of NWSSP. You've described in your witness statement, paragraph 50, that the stockpile was administered and managed as per our NHS Wales business as usual stock via an Oracle financial management system in a temperature-controlled environment, and you've explained how expired stock was managed and disposed of. I suppose in brief terms, was the reality that NWSSP would monitor the expiry dates of stock, but ultimately it would be Welsh Government that gave the instructions as to whether that stock was to be disposed of?
That's correct, yes.
And what about cycling out or into the NHS prior to expiry? Is that something NWSSP did?
No, no, and I think it's important again to point out that the majority of the PPE in the PIP stockpile would not have been considered routine use or business as usual products for the NHS, and were very much products that would be used in a pandemic scenario. So there wouldn't have been the opportunity to cycle out products in the way that you've described.
And in terms of the contents of the stockpile, Welsh Government would take decisions on the range of products and the volumes
Correct.
to be contained within it?
Yes.
All right. Can we display, please, INQ 000 300270. Thank you very much. So this is a spreadsheet that sets out the items within the stockpile. Column K indicates stock that has expired, and at rows 23, 24 and 25, we can see FFP3 face mask respirators listed there. Can see highlighted in red there 3 zeros in relation to in-date stock, and the rest of the stock out of date, with the exception of additional from NHS England, which was in date. So I'd like to ask you a few questions about that, please. As per your previous answer, this doesn't only display PP, but we're focusing on those FFP3 masks just for the moment. Did it come as a surprise to NWSSP that the majority of the FFP3 masks held in the pit stockpile had expired by early 2020?
I wouldn't say it came as a surprise, because obviously we held the stock, and we worked, I have to say, we worked closely with the Welsh Government representatives who came out to inspect the stock on a regular basis. So there would have been an awareness that the date life had expired on those products at that time, which then prompted the action that followed in terms of further testing.
Can you help us understand why that stock wasn't immediately replenished?
That, I'm not trying to be evasive. That would have been a decision that Welsh Government would have had to have taken, and would have been a matter for them to have answered. We simply held the stock, provided them with the details of what was there, and obviously a record of what the date lives were. And they, having had that information, had the responsibility to take decisions as to the necessary actions to take.
How far in advance would NWSSP have briefed Welsh Government in relation to looming expiry dates?
I can't answer that question with any certainty, apart from going back to my previous response, which is that there was a regular review of our PIP stockpile with Welsh Government representative colleagues. So they would have been aware through those visits and through that information being provided of those details that you see.
And then we see at row 25 that additional FFP3, it simply says in brackets, additional from NHS England, and then we read across there are 59,600 in date. Can you help us with whether that was stock that was in fact held, or whether that was expected to be provided in due course by NHS England?
That is in-date stock that was actually held, so that was physically there.
That was physically there and ready,
Yes.
ready to deploy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We can remove that document now. You've explained at your paragraph 52, page 12 of your witness statement, which is INQ 000536425. You've explained the retesting process and the process for extending the shelf life of expired stock. So what we just looked at on the screen in terms of the red items, that wasn't the end of the story, was it?
No.
There we are, thank you very much. That's on the screen. These items are in fact retested at a UK level on 3 separate occasions, and approved through Public Health Wales, Business Services Authority and Public Health England, respectively. The third occasion for retesting was during the start of the pandemic, and it wasn't possible to relabel the expiry dates on every occasion, was it?
No. So there was 3 tests undertaken, as you quite rightly point out. The first 2 tests that extended the date life on 2 occasions On each of those 2 occasions, the products were overlabeled with the new approved expiry date that had been approved subject to that, on the basis of that testing. On the 3rd occasion, there simply wasn't time to do the labelling again. It's a very labour-intensive process for our team to do that. And at that point, which was late into March 2020, we had received the test certificate to say that the FFP3s were suitable for use, and that was through InSpec. It was the testing house that Public Health England, now UXA, had used. So it was clear that that had been done. So NWSSP put together a frequently asked questions, or FAQ guidance form, that went into the box with the FFP3 masks to explain why staff, when they opened it, would see the expiry date didn't match the actual dates of that particular day, in an attempt to allay some of the anticipated concerns that would be raised by staff.
And while these items were retested and their shelf life extended, did that result in delays in distribution to the front line?
No. We moved swiftly in terms of the retesting to overlabel, and the decision then to release the FFP3 masks from the PIP stockpile was then given to us by Welsh Government, so that by that point in time we had the masks, the FFP3s, were ready to go, either with the FAQ guidance that was then in place.
You say you moved swiftly. Can you tell us roughly how long it took for the shelf life extension testing and the test certificates to be completed? How long did that process take?
The testing itself I can't comment on because that was outside of Wales. In terms of getting the FAQ guidance into the box and getting the FFP3 masks out once we were instructed to release them by Welsh Government Emergency Planning Coordinator, that was simply a matter of several days. And as you can see there, we commenced on the 25th of March 2020 to go and release that into the NHS in Wales.
So days as opposed to weeks?
Oh, yes, yes.
But you're not able to be any more specific than that?
Unfortunately not, sorry.
Right. In terms of distribution of the items in the stockpile, were there any challenges that NWSSP encountered?
In what context, sorry?
Were there any difficulties in getting PIP stock to the front line in Wales?
No. No, we were able to, once we were instructed by Welsh Government to release the PIP stock, then we were able to take that directly from the PIP stockpile location to the relevant hospital sites.
You address at paragraphs 142 to 147 warehouse capacity.
Yes.
We've talked about the PIP stock, but obviously NWSSP had to scale up its buying activities. The customer base, if I can describe it in that way, also increased from NHS trusts and health boards to include, as we've discussed, the social care sector. What did NWSSP do in order to manage those vastly increased volumes of items that were going through its processes?
Okay, so just to add to the scaling up, also at the end of March, we were also asked to supply PPE to the primary care contractors, so GPs, dentists, pharmacists, as well as social care.
Yes.
So there was a couple of things that we were able to do quickly to scale up. We were able to release some of the Brexit stockpile that had been put in place as a contingency on the transit out of the EU for those products that formed part of the PPE range, such as nitrile examination gloves. So we already had in place a buffer stock at our Newport warehouse facility. Then moving on to that facility itself, it provided us with an enormous space in which to bring in larger volumes of product centrally for Wales and then distribute them on from there either directly into hospitals and also in parallel feed out to our 2 other regional warehouses, one in the north of Wales and one in the south as well. So it allowed us a really good staging point and distribution point for the volumes of product that we ended up supplying to NHS, social care and primary care contractors.
So you describe at paragraph 142 that you spread stock across your warehouse network, including in Bridgend and Denbigh. Is that what you're describing there?
That's correct. So in particular, it was important to place stock in the north of Wales because the transit time from south to north can be considerable. So it made sense to have a stockpile there as well.
You say in your statement, additional warehouse capacity from the commercial sector was brought online in North, South West and South Wales. So was that was further to your existing network? You were able to secure commercial warehousing spaces? That's
correct. And that was to supplement the warehousing capacity that we had available to us to utilise given the volumes and the bulky nature of PPE. It's not a small scale product to stock in terms of floor space or pallet space.
That's the warehousing. Can we talk about distribution, please?
Yep.
So the same issues obviously arise, increased volume, a lot of pressure to get items to the front line quickly. You tell us in your witness statement that, in fact, initially there were 6 suppliers who were engaged, who were in fact from the food distribution industry, and they were engaged to distribute PPE. They had pre-existing networks. Can you explain why those were selected and how effective the choice of using food distributors was?
Okay, so I just want to clarify that the 6 companies that are in the bullet point in paragraph 145, only Castell Hall is a food distributor. Jerry Jones, Owens Group and Delivery Solutions are all recognised warehousing and freight companies. TDW Distribution is another distribution company, and Pallet Line are, as their name suggests, involved in pallets. So it wasn't just food distributors, and the 3 companies that you previously referred to that we used commercial storage space with were Jerry Jones, Owens Group and Delivery Solutions. So we contracted that capacity into our network to allow us to store and quickly decant PPE to the relevant locations where necessary.
Oh, thank you very much. And how effective was the use of these distributors?
It was excellent. Those 6 were used in the early days. The very early days, we eventually and swiftly moved to Jerry Jones, Owens and Delivery Solutions based on their capacity and their geographical location and our previous work with those organisations. It was invaluable in terms of the support that they were able to provide us in storage and at times distribution of the PPE.
There are quite a range of companies that you list in your witness statement. Were there any challenges encountered in working with this many different parties and coordinating the activities of this many different parties in an emergency?
Not particularly. Each individual supplier who we worked with had a clear contractual obligation to deliver a certain product type or types in certain prescribed volumes to particular delivery points, which would have been within our warehousing network. So while there were a number of suppliers that we had to engage with to meet the demand, and in terms of volume and the spread of products that was required, it didn't cause any particular difficulties, no.
I'm going to ask you next about sourcing activity and the details of how procurement was carried out during the pandemic. You tell us that NWSSP began sourcing activity for all PP products during the 20th of March 2020, and the first items were delivered 5 days later, in fact, 25th of March. Why was it that NWSSP started that sourcing activity at that point in March 2020?
The reason that we had to, and we had no choice but to start sourcing, was because our stock levels were low in comparison to obviously where we would have wanted them to be, given the demand that we were experiencing. There was no clear indication from UK central organisations, whether that be NHS England or DHSC, that any replenishment of the PIP stockpile or any other supplies would be forthcoming. So we had no option but to start to source in the global market ourselves as on behalf of all of NHS Wales.
And we see from our exhibits, and we've heard in our verbal evidence as well, that there were attempts to set up a Welsh PP supply chain. There was a call to industry issued by the First Minister and then echoed by Ken Skates. Did that result in NWSSP being approached by a very high number of potential contractors?
Yes, it did. And, it was, all offers were gratefully received. And, the intentions of everybody offering help were, I believe, the best of intentions to support the country in a time of crisis. But the consequence was that we were inundated with a large number of offers, particularly in the first few weeks and the first 2 to 3 months of the pandemic.
And is it right that Life Sciences Hub Wales was brought in to conduct triage of those many offers before passing them on to NWSSP?
Yes, initially my organisation, we triaged everything that came in through our email portal. But given the scale of the number of offers coming in, the first steps of the triage process, which was just the gathering of the information from prospective suppliers that would be required, we agreed with Life Sciences Hub that they would take that particular work on, so really the front door work, and therefore any opportunities that were passed to us had all the necessary information and documentation to allow my staff and the surgical materials testing laboratory staff and NWSSP to make further, more detailed professional assessment of what was being offered.
You've mentioned the SMTL, the Surgical Materials Testing Laboratory. Can you explain what their role was and how they fit into NWSSP?
Yes, so SMTL are an integral part of NWSSP. They're their own separate division alongside my division and the other elements of SSP that I mentioned at the start. Their role in the triage process was to really triage the technical requirements for the products in relation to the offers that we were receiving. And I suppose in sort of very general terms, that was a twofold assessment. First of all, a critical assessment of the documentation and certifications that were being presented to us, with cross-referencing and checking against established databases and notified body laboratories within Europe. And also, where required, they undertook some physical testing of the products themselves to determine their capacity and capability to meet the requirements laid down in regulation. And they did that through the laboratories that they operate. And that is work that SMTL in normal times undertake for NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership for my teams in relation to assessing products, medical and surgical products that are used routinely in NHS Wales as they come into us on tenders for national contracts. So they're very familiar, and we've always worked very closely with them as a unit.
In terms of the physical testing of products, during the pandemic, was that done retrospectively once product had been delivered, or was it not done because of the difficulties in supply chains?
No, any testing that was undertaken was prospective. However, the assessment of certification and all of the necessary documentation was also prospective as well. So no offers were progressed and no product was brought in unless those elements of the triage process had been passed by SMTL.
Thank you. Can we display, please, INQ 000512459? This is a diagram that illustrates the workflow. A request received by NWSSP, is that a request to enter into a contract or an offer of PPE?
It would be an offer of PPE that would come in through that particular contact point.
And then we see in red there, if no response from source within 3 days, offer not pursued, closed. So that's in relation to the triage team asking for technical specifications, asking about notified bodies and certification and so on, asking really specific questions about the product. If that response is not received within 3 days, offer not pursued. Is that right?
That's correct. And the intention behind that was to put the onus back on the offerer as opposed to onto my teams. We were dealing with an inordinate number of requests coming through. So we put the onus back on the potential supplier to prove to us that their product could work and provide us with the necessary information. And if they didn't do that within, a 3-day time period, then we didn't expedite that further.
And was there a worry that this sort of rather strict approach would result in complaints or in disgruntled potential suppliers?
No, I would argue probably the opposite, in that 3 days, I was going to say a day in March, April, May 2020 was like a month now. Actually, what I would probably say is that an hour in March, April, May 2020 is like a month now. So 3 days was an exceptionally long period of time. We were turning around offers very, very quickly, at lightning speed. So, and there was certainly no feedback or response from companies or prospective suppliers saying we'd acted too quickly.
And then looking at the diagram again, we can see, assuming the offer is pursued, we go on to the SMTL checks for quality, validation. If there were queries, we see queries sent to supplier to validation, given 24 hours to respond. Again, did this very tight turnaround period result in complaints, in pressure on NWSSP?
No, not at all. And in fact, usually if there were queries returned to suppliers by SMTL, it was about their uncertainty around the validity or genuineness of the offer being made through the documentation that they had seen, for instance. So basically those suppliers who then failed to respond to those observations that were sent back to them was probably an indication that maybe their product wasn't what they had originally claimed it would be. And there certainly wasn't any, again, adverse noise coming back to us in that respect.
Thank you. Now, Life Sciences Hub assisted with an awful lot of the triage, and they tell us that about 75% of offers were considered unsuitable. Does that accord with your recollection?
Yes, that sounds right.
And is it also correct that there was no high priority lane or VIP lane administered by NWSSP?
That's correct. There was no lane.
There was a sort of fast track in the form of the critical items list. Can you explain to us what the critical items list was, and how items on it were prioritised?
Okay, so yeah, I just want to be very clear on that. It wasn't a fast track in that it was like we were acting on instructions of outside parties. The critical items list was a fast track in respect of these were the items that were critically required by NHS Wales. So if offers came in to supply NHS Wales with PPE products, for instance, then those would be some of the critical items that our team would go, right, we want those. But the call to industry was, as I suppose it had to be at the time, it wasn't communicated, and these are exactly all the types of products that we need. So we got quite a few offers through for products that weren't in short supply or indeed maybe required as part of the pandemic response. So the critical items list was simply a direction to my staff to say, here's the products that we need and here's the products that we need to look out for. And also that fed into the work that CERET also looked at in relation to how they identified those products that they would be seeking to work with industry partners to develop local sources of supply for.
The critical items list was provided to CERET specifically for that purpose, wasn't it?
It was. It was to focus their resources and attention on those areas that NHS Wales were, facing potential challenges on.
In terms of the work of CERET, we shall hear a little more about that later this afternoon. But can we just turn to paragraph 127 at page 31 of your witness statement? So that's INQ 000536425. This is a paragraph in which you address the impact of the work of CERET as observed by NWSSP. You tell us that procurement services did not observe any noticeable impact on the availability of PPE in Wales as a result of the work of CERET and the allocation of grants to manufacturers in order for them to repurpose to the manufacture of PPE. The majority of products supplied by Welsh manufacturers were secured early in the pandemic, prior to the outworkings of the programmes supported by CERET. The time taken for Welsh manufacturers to develop suitably certified PPE products that were urgently required early in the pandemic. It took some time to come online, didn't it?
Yes.
Now, you have, of course, given us a second witness statement in which you explicitly refer to a company, British Rototerm, which had been assisted by CERET. And so what you say in this paragraph has to be seen in light of the fact that, in fact, NWSSP did award a number of contracts to that company, which had repurposed its manufacturing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So in the production of my second witness statement and the specific request to provide information around the procurement with British Rototerm for face visors, I did then establish that that company had worked with CERET initially to repurpose their production to produce face visors. That wasn't apparent to me at the point I wrote the witness statement that's on screen here, which was my first statement. So that would be a qualification of that.
And in fact, it's right that a total of £15.5 million worth of contracts were awarded to that company by NWSSP, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. And just maybe to add, if I could, just very quickly, again, I limited my witness statement strictly to the scope of the PPE products as defined in the outline for this module. And so that didn't include hand sanitizer, for example. Hand sanitizer was produced locally in Wales with, again, support from CERET at times. But it didn't feature in my statement simply because it wasn't one of the prescribed items under the scope for this module.
Understood. So you did observe an impact in the work of CERET on hand sanitizer supply.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Domestically. Thank you. That's very helpful. One of the matters that you identify in that paragraph is the time it took for companies to gain regulatory approval. Was the time it took to secure regulatory approval or CE markings or for testing houses to carry out their work, was that a recurring theme that NWSSP had to contend with during the pandemic?
No. It was only an issue for those manufacturers who were starting to produce PPE where they didn't have experience of doing so. The manufacturers that we dealt with for PPE manufacturing already had the necessary regulatory requirements in place, and that was established and certified again through the triage process that we've spoken about. So the challenge in relation to getting the time it took to get those regulatory and legislative requirements in place for the product, whatever it happened to be, was a challenge for those manufacturers moving as a new repurposing to develop those products, as opposed to more established manufacturers who had them in place.
You've touched upon the PP winter plan just briefly. That was in the winter of 2020, and NWSSP and Welsh Government drew up a plan for PPE sourcing and strategy for the foreseeable future, as you were mid-pandemic, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
And one decision that was taken was to hold a buffer stock that would last 24 weeks. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And that was then reduced to 16 weeks later on?
It was reduced initially to 20 weeks and then subsequently to 16 weeks later, yeah.
You told us that your witness statement, perhaps unsurprisingly, I would describe the early stages of the pandemic as very challenging due to the exceptionally high levels of demand for PPE products. And NHS organisations were ordering large amounts of PPE. Is it right that NHS organisations early on didn't really know how much PPE product they needed?
Yes, I would say that was pretty much the position. So, and I'm not being flippant here, but, if I could equate it to what I'm sure everybody saw in their own lives at that point in February, March, April 2020, you go to the supermarkets, certain shelves would be cleared of certain products, simply for exactly the same reason. The principle's the same. I think there was a general sort of, maybe panic's too strong a word, but there was large volume requests coming through. But I think it was a factor of, concern as to having enough product and not knowing how long this thing was going to last for. But that's, me speculating, I suppose, to some extent.
Did NWSSP engage in what has been termed by other witnesses as demand management, the cancelling down of orders or the encouraging of trusts or health boards to reduce their orders?
No, I wouldn't say, wouldn't term it that way. Certainly in the initial 2-3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks of most of March possibly, I suppose to set the context to that question, we were dealing with a finite amount of stock that was held in the PIP stockpile with no, certainly up to the third week in March, I would argue, no real clear line of sight as to how that was going to be replenished or if it was going to be replenished. Bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind what I've just previously said about potential sort of almost panic to get product into the hospitals, we had to make sure that PIP stockpile was available to all health boards and trusts across Wales. We couldn't have a position where one health board came in and took 60 to 70% of the stock, leaving others without anything. So in that respect, we had to make sure that there were sufficient quantities for everybody. So we had to make a determination. However, I would further qualify that to say that Welsh Government also gave instruction on certain products as to the initial volumes to release to the health boards for products such as Type 2R masks and FFP3s. And it wasn't until we started to bring our own inward supply lines in towards the end of March and onwards, and then the development of the demand modelling and the history that started to develop about regular patterns of use, that then things started to settle down.
That raises, I suppose, two topics. The first is visibility of stock of PPE across the NHS estate broadly, across the social care sector in due course, and across NWSSP warehouses, and also data around usage rates, which I think you accept wasn't available, simply didn't exist before the pandemic. can we turn up, please, INQ 000500182? While that's coming up on screen, NWSSP received assistance from the military in relation to both of those topics, didn't it?
Yes.
And so this is a report dated the 11th of May, prepared by the military, improving visibility and management. Report 1, there's a report 2 as well. If we take a look at the executive summary there, the overall assessment was that NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership and the delivery of PPE within Wales had maintained regular stock inflow, and that while the systems were fragile, it could sustain with the current demand phase. But it warned if the recommendations proposed in this report are not acted on, SSP could be capable to continue past the surge peak phase we're moving into and crucially maintain supplies in the event of COVID-19 surge conditions, remain inefficient and costly, inflexible, and lack the full visibility of PP stock levels, consumption, and potential blockages. Can we go to page 2 of that document? Thank you very much. It provides an overview, and at paragraph 6 we see that there was a lack of confidence detected, that there was a perception among frontline staff, both within the NHS and social care sector, that there were shortages of PPE. This lack of confidence has resulted in unsustainable practices of stock hoarding in certain parts of the system and over-demand. Does that reflect your experience as well?
I would say so. I think the sentence after that is very telling in terms of why that lack of confidence existed, in terms of really a lack of information as to what stock was in the hospitals themselves. And we were developing a clear idea of how much demand was going through the system, but in the very early days, as you've rightly said, we were starting really from scratch in that regard. And that's why our colleagues in the NHS in Wales really didn't have an understanding what a day of supply consisted of. Add into the mix changes to the use of PPE.
The IPC guidance change.
Yes, and that, again, I would suggest caused further concerns as to what stock would be required and in what volumes at times within the NHS more generally.
Can we go to page 7 of that same document, please? Inaccurate reports and returns to the return system DCR calculations and modelling. Effectively, what's identified here is that there was a need to get a common logistics picture, and that there were inaccuracies at the time of writing the report on usage data, effectively. NWSSP contracted with Deloitte. Is it right that Deloitte developed modelling that gave a picture of stock held locally by health boards and joint equipment stores?
I would say the Deloitte modelling didn't provide details of what was physically and actually being held locally and in joint equipment stores, but it provided a forward look into what would likely be required by those areas, as opposed to a real-time picture of what was actually there. And I think that gap in information was one of the problems that resulted in what came out of the military report's recommendations further down the line.
The second report, which is dated the 4th of June 2020, recommended a pan-Wales PP reporting and tracking tool. It suggested a particular piece of software. Is it right that NWSSP introduced the Stockwatch system?
That's correct, yes.
And is that still in use to this day?
In certain places it is, but more generally I would say it's not in use any longer.
All right. Thinking back to the pandemic, did that then provide an effective overview of stock levels and usage rates during the pandemic?
It contributed to a more effective overview. It wasn't the full answer, not because the system itself and the plan to introduce it was in any way flawed. It was the right thing to do, but it didn't provide a full picture simply because it wasn't completed. The information wasn't input into the system at source, either in the hospital or in the joint equipment stores on a consistent or regular basis. And in some cases, we only got information keyed in to that system maybe on a weekly basis, which really meant that, we were still having gaps in understanding how much stock those areas actually required.
In the future, would it be useful to have an automated system that wasn't reliant on human input of updates and stock levels?
Yes, and within shared services and NHS Wales more generally, we have over the last few years introduced Scan for Safety, which is barcode scanning for medical devices more generally, and that is a system that we will be applying and do apply on certain products already to some of the PPE range, which takes away the necessity of this sort of more manual intervention.
I'm going to deal very briefly now with excess PPE. You tell us in your witness statement, in terms of excess stock at paragraph 230, that NWSSP has written off and written down in the 2 years up to April 2022, £12 million of stock due to re-evaluation and expiry of shelf life, and this represents just over 3% of the value of the total PP stock purchased. So that's expiry, but that's also writing down because resale value has gone down. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So in the following paragraph, 231, the actual amount of write-off due to expiry of that figure was just under £2 million. So of that £12 million, the vast majority of it was written down as in the stock's fine, it's in date life, but we wrote down the value to the market price as it is or was then.
Yes. And going forward, post-2022, the monthly cost of additional commercial storage for PPE is £13,411. Is that right?
Yes.
And is NWSSP continuing to explore ways of disposing of stock that is considered excess, that is beyond the buffer that's required by Welsh Government?
Yes, we are. We've already implemented, put in place donations over the last period of time to several countries. And we're also currently exploring auctioning of some of the PPE as well.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you now to address some example contracts, if we can. In your second witness statement, you helpfully go through some example contracts which were entered into during the pandemic in respect of PPE. The first is contract with Anne Hui. This was awarded on the 6th of May 2020 in respect of type IIR face masks. The total cost eventually was £23,400,000. This was a contract entered into on behalf of all 4 nations of the UK, is that right?
That's correct.
And the stock secured, in fact, saw Wales through to February 2021, is that right?
That's correct. We further modified that contract to take a further, sort of a doubling of the initial amount, and we brought the second part of that into Wales alone. So the first part supplied the whole of the UK, all 4 nations, and the second part was then for Wales.
And as we try and trace it through very quickly from cradle to grave, this was not a supply that came to your attention through the triage process that we've looked at with Life Sciences Hub Wales. This came through a sourcing agent called BTB Wales, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
And BTP Wales had been appointed by NWSSP to do precisely this kind of work, is that correct?
Yes, but I think it's important to point out that BTB Wales themselves came to our attention through the same triage process. So they didn't come to us sort of outside of that process, and they came through that same portal.
Did BTB Wales act as an intermediary, or were they simply, did they get a cut of the price, or did they simply facilitate the introduction?
They facilitated, but they were much more than that. They had people on the ground in China, Malaysia in particular, where we sourced these products from, who inspected the factories, did a lot of the due diligence and the quality control checks, and they were also responsible for the insurance and freight forwarding arrangements.
So they assisted a great deal in the process.
Correct,
of
yes.
securing the item. Once NWSSP had concluded that it would be a viable contract, the contract had to come before the Financial Governance Group.
Yes.
Their role was to scrutinise any proposed deal if it was particularly high value, is that right?
That's correct.
And we can see there INQ 000540492 is a document placed before the FGG, the Finance Governance Group. Some basic details about the proposed contract were set out there. The idea was to provide about 95% of the volume to other nations, but you've explained that there were some variations on that. If we go to page 13 of that document, the group felt that the price was competitive but carried considerable risk, and further due diligence was required. We see that as a further meeting held the 30th of April 2020. Were those concerns then addressed?
Yes, they were. I mean, the risk was perceived initially that there was a risk in dealing with BTBW, but the contract wasn't established with BTBW. The contract was established directly with the manufacturer in the source country. And furthermore, the funds and the payment was transacted through an escrow account, which provided security for the funds until we had the assurances that the product met the quality standards at dockside or airport side before it came into the UK, and we had those certifications and those assurances in hand. And so there was a phased release of funds, which provided assurance and mitigated a substantial amount of any risk.
And that there were also stages of delivery and stages of payment, were there not?
Correct, and because of the volumes here, these were staged deliveries, in some cases over 13 separate deliveries. And then in terms of the method of delivery, some of this was brought in through sea freight as well, which kept the costs low as well.
You've rightly pointed out the contract was established with the company, with An Hui, as opposed to BTB Wales. A contract award notice was ultimately published in relation to this contract. Does that contract award notice name An Hui?
It names BTBW as the contractor, and the contract award notice refers to the work that BTBW undertook, which was the SGS, or the quality assurance approvals, the insurance, the freight forwarding work, and that part of their work that they were responsible for. The contract with An Hui itself was signed, and it's in the evidence, but there was no contract award notice specifically for An Hui because they were based in China, which at that point in time was outside of the EU and outside of the government procurement arrangements, so outside of GPA. So there was no legal obligation for us to provide a contract award notice for that company.
If a member of the public wanted to look at the contract award notice, they would see BTB Wales. In your view, does the failure to name An Hui, in light of everything you've said around legal obligations, and I'm not suggesting they weren't met, does that provide full transparency for the taxpayer?
I think it does, to the point that in the actual award notice, I believe, in the body of the notice itself, which was published, it refers to the the payment to BTBW for their work was in respect of establishing that contract with Anne Huey, so there was reference to the manufacturer. I take your point, however, that members of the public, would not have been able to find a contract award notice for Anne Huey as such because of the reasons I've stated. So from a transparency point of view, I suppose that would not have been visible to a member of the public who wouldn't have had a wider knowledge of that transaction.
And ultimately, there were no issues identified with the product, and it was distributed across all 4 nations.
Correct, yes.
I'm going to very briefly touch upon another example of what I suppose we might describe as mutual aid. NWSSP in April 2020 entered into a contract for the supply of PPE with a company called Continuum Scotland Limited.
Yes.
The contract value was just over £21 million. The items were received within Wales. At the time the order was placed, there was a real danger of stock out, wasn't there?
The position in Wales was more stable in that we had other lines of supply at that point in time already landed or inbound to us. So while it was still an important contract for us, and the volumes that we brought in were significant, our position had stabilised a bit more than it had been at the start of the pandemic for that product.
The product was received, supply had stabilised. In due course, NWSSP resold some of this stock to BSO Pals in Northern Ireland, is that right?
Correct, yes.
I think they purchased just over £5 million worth of this PPE. BSO Pals ultimately withdrew those items from use in Northern Ireland. In your witness statement, you detail the reasons of which you are aware, which is that they were described as providing poor fit. They were face masks that had a device fitted to ensure good fit across the bridge of the nose, and it wasn't made of the material that BSO Pals wanted it to be, but it was sufficient for Wales. This was a matter of preference as opposed to technical regulatory compliance, wasn't it?
Yes, so it wasn't that it was a preference for Wales was the main reason. The Type 2R face mask itself was assessed and approved as meeting all of the necessary technical and regulatory requirements for a Type 2R face mask. The material that the nose clip is made of in this particular consignment was plastic, and you mould that around the bridge of the nose to provide a closer fit to the face. As I understand it, Northern Ireland preferred a metal nose clip, but the material of the nose clip, irrespective of whether it was plastic or metal, had no bearing on whether it met the technical and regulatory requirements for a Type 2R face mask. So to me, it was a matter that Northern Ireland preferred a metal nose clip, and that was my understanding of why they sort of refused to use the product.
Finally, was this issue of preference or items that frontline staff were used to using, was that something that cropped up within Wales as well, and something that NWSSP had to contend with? Preferences for brands, for specific features that were not really to do with whether a regulator deemed them to be safe?
To an extent, I think the core range of PPE products, face masks, gloves, RPE, FFP3 products, and gowns were very clearly and closely prescribed by the UK cell and therefore into Welsh Government specification. However, in Wales, we had very much a preference due to the fit requirements for a particular type of FFP3 mask, which was manufactured by 3M. And that limited our ability to source alternative masks from other manufacturers. Even though those masks would have met the standards for an FFP3, the fit test pass rate for our staff would have been a lot lower than it would have been for the 3M. And staff got, and it's very understandable, isn't it, really, that staff want to see a 3M mask because they feel assured, they feel confident wearing it, that it protects them because they know they've been fit tested on it. If you try and change that to another brand of mask during a pandemic where it could have potentially fatal consequences, obviously they're going to have concerns. So they wanted the mask that they knew gave them the most protection in terms of a fit test outcome. So that's how I would describe preference, but it was in that context.
Thank you. My lady, those are my questions for this witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardy. Mr. Irvine, we take a break every so often. You've got 15 minutes more questions. I can either take the break now if you're happy to come back after a 15-minute break, or if you need to get away, let me know and we'll carry on with the questions.
I'm happy either way, so it's up to you, my lady.
Okay, in which case, probably for the stenographer's benefit, we'll take the break, 15 minutes, and then we should come back and finish you.
Thank you.
That's okay, thank you. It's 20 past. Thank you. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you, my lady.
Thank you. I think Mr. Dale is next, isn't he? Thank you. Mr. Dale.
Thank you, my lady. Mr. Irvine, I ask questions on behalf of FEMO, the Federation of Ethnic Minority Healthcare Organizations, and I have 3 short topics. Firstly, paragraph 24 of your statement details the rapid initiation of sourcing activities for PPE during March 2020, including new and existing types of PPE like fluid-resistant thumb loop gowns and FFP3 masks. Given the diverse needs of healthcare workers, particularly Black and ethnic minority groups, how did procurement services ensure that these products met varied fit and functionality requirements?
So procurement services procured the prescribed range of PPE products to the specifications and the design requirements that had been laid down by UK government, IPC, and through Welsh government as to what we were to buy. So we had really very limited latitude in terms of deviating from those prescribed specifications. However, when we look at products such as nitrile examination gloves, for example, we did actively source extra small sizes of those gloves to meet the specific ethnic needs of a percentage of our nursing population who needed an extra small glove at the time. The FFP3 mask itself, by design, is designed to be adjustable, top and bottom, through strap adjustment. So that in itself was an adjustable mask, and we've already had discussions about how we tried to ensure we got a mask that met the fit test needs for the vast majority of our staff. So that was the context in which we were working, and those were the actions that we took in that regard.
Very well. Secondly, could you clarify how feedback from healthcare workers, especially those from Black and ethnic minority groups, regarding fit issues was integrated into the procurement process to adapt and improve the PPE supplied during the pandemic?
So any issues that were raised like that would have been fed back in through Welsh Government, because going back, and apologies for repeating, but going back to my previous answer, we as in shared services, as the procuring organisation, did not have the latitude to procure alternative variations to the prescribed specification. So it was up to Welsh Government and other policymakers to look at those areas of feedback and make a determination as to whether or not they needed to add to the existing range of products that were established as PPE core lines, or to instruct shared services to source and stock an alternative product or range of products to meet those requirements.
Very well. And thirdly and finally, paragraph 29 of your statement, you mentioned the implementation of new governance measures during the pandemic, including the triage process and the establishment of the Finance Governance Group, or FGG. How did these changes ensure compliance with the public sector equality duty, particularly in terms of addressing the diverse needs of healthcare workers in PPE procurement?
So all of the requirements for the manufacturing, specification, design, and all of the different components for a PPE product to keep staff safe were determined by policy leads, UK central government, IPC, cells, and they translated into instructions to ourselves and procurement services and procurement colleagues around the UK as to this is the type of product that you have to purchase. So in that regard, you know, with respect, I think the question would be better answered by those colleagues who designed those specifications and determined what it was that we were asked to buy. Because I said our latitude in that respect was relatively limited.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. And now, Ms. Parsons, should you be... Unless they've moved in my absence.
I'm here. Thank you, my lady. Good afternoon, Mr. Irvine.
Good afternoon.
I ask questions on behalf of the COVID-19 bereaved families for Justice Cymru. I'm going to ask you about two topics. The first topic is supply of PPE to care homes in Wales. We know that on the 19th of March 2020, the Welsh Government expanded the remit of your organisation for shared services such that it distributed to the social care sector as well. We understand that shared services did that by distributing to local authority joint equipment stores, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
For onward distribution by the local authorities.
Yes.
Care Forum Wales, which, as you know, is the main professional representative body for care providers in Wales, they've provided a witness statement to this inquiry. I'm going to ask that you be shown a small passage within it. Please can we have up on the screen INQ 000 521 963 at page 4. Paragraph 17 of the statement says this: PPE was initially distributed in proportion to the size of the distributing local authority rather than the size of the care homes within the authority. A new stock management system was introduced in November 2020 that enabled supply to respond to demand rather than allocation. Now, at paragraph 76 of your statement, Mr. Irvine, you described shared services inventory management system called Stockwatch. And indeed, you described some alterations to it in November 2020. First question is this: when Care Forum Wales were talking there about a new stock management system, do you think it's likely it was talking about Stockwatch?
Yes, I do, yes.
Why did it take until November 2020, that is some 8 months after the Welsh Government's announcement of the expansion of shared services to the social care sector, why did it take until November 2020 to introduce the new stock management system?
I believe the stock management system, Stockwatch, was introduced earlier than November 2020. The date of November 2020 is significant because that is when we switched to the joint equipment stores keying in or inputting their own data to that system, because prior to that time, my staff had to consistently chase and expedite joint equipment stores staff to do that work and to provide us with the information for us to input on their behalf, which, given where we were in the pandemic, was putting additional pressure on my resources. And so I wouldn't say it was in November 2020 when the system was introduced. November 2020, as it states in my system, was the date on which it switched to direct user input. So the joint equipment stores employees input the data themselves into that system that then helped to inform my warehouse staff as to what their requirements were. Up until that point, we were relying on those staff to send my staff that information so we could key it into the system themselves. So, that's couldn't continue. So we put the responsibility back to the joint equipment stores to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Irvine. Can I ask you the question then on the basis that it refers to the change in system in November 2020 that you've described? Why did it take that long to implement what, with respect, would seem to be a fairly obvious change?
I think it's because the military reports highlighted the need for a stock management system, both at joint equipment store and in hospital levels, for management of the stock and visibility of the stock at that point. Why it took that long was because we were consistently, and through the PP Executive Leads Group and the Welsh Government groups, raising the issue that we had gaps in the information from joint equipment stores coming to us. To be fair, some joint equipment stores did provide us regular information on what their requirements were, others didn't. My staff were consistently trying to plug the gap for the local authorities in that regard. So it wasn't about a delay in implementing the system. It was about, we got to the point where we couldn't, as I said a minute ago, we couldn't continue to provide that sort of level of input into this process.
If I may say, Mr. Irvine, I detect an element of frustration in your answer about the lack of input from those at local authority level. Is that fair?
I don't think it's fair to call it frustration. I think what it did, it added to the pressure on the system, in that if we didn't have the data coming through from the joint equipment store, then it was more difficult for us to accurately determine what their requirements were. So any frustration, if you wanted to use that word, your word, not mine, would be that we weren't able necessarily to understand that we were filling their full requirements. I believe we were, but we didn't have that information, so it did prove challenging at the time.
Thank you, Mr. Irvine. And before we move on from this, you've suggested that there were gaps in your understanding at a local level. That was your evidence today. Does that mean then, in effect, that some some health boards and some local authorities did not have enough PPE because you did not have a sufficiently clear picture of what their stock level was?
No, I think it's actually the opposite. What we found on a number of occasions were that we were being told that, well, we don't have enough of a particular product, only to be able to provide the evidence very quickly that we had made a delivery of that product to that particular joint equipment store the day before, or even the same day at times. So the issue about the accuracy of the data was that we believed that we had more than enough PPE in the joint equipment stores, but that the joint equipment stores weren't necessarily, or indeed the local authorities more generally, weren't aware potentially of what was actually there.
So plenty of stock, they just didn't know about it?
In some occasions, I believe that's the case, yes.
I'll move on to my second topic, which is lessons learned. You set out lessons learned in 5 paragraphs at the end of your witness statement, paragraphs 225 to 229. We don't need to turn them up, but I want to ask you about the reference you make to the Audit Wales report. You say the report recognised we overcame early challenges in relation to the provision of PPE without running out of stock at a national level. What about overcoming challenges at a local level, Mr. Irvine? We know that problems persisted. Members of the group I represent witnessed shortages well into the pandemic and into 2021. They probably won't recognise the description that you've offered of plenty of supplies. Can you help? Do you accept that there were shortages that persisted? And if so, what lessons can be learnt from localised shortages?
Well, the first point to make is that I absolutely accept what your colleagues are telling you and what I've heard more widely in the NHS. So I've no reason to dispute the lived experience of people in care homes, carers, staff in wards at the time. I think the more important issue here is to understand what the responsibilities of my organisation are and where they started and where they ended. And when you talk about a national position, in our warehouses, we did not run out of stock on the shelf. We continue to supply day and daily to the NHS, to social care and to primary care, to the point of delivery in those particular areas. What happened to the product after it was delivered and how it was managed and distributed onwards, and that issue has been referenced in at least 2 of the military reports about problems for the onward management and distribution, is the responsibility of those organisations themselves, whether they're the hospitals within the health boards or whether it's the local authorities. So I don't dispute the lived experiences, but my own lived experience of this was that at a national level we continue to have a flow of stock through the system at all times. And I've just tried to explain where we bridged into those areas and where we dropped the product into. So that's all I can comment on in that respect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irvine. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Parsons. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Irvine. With that concludes our questions for you. I'm sorry you had to keep you after the break. I'm sorry, because I think we've got a colleague of yours who's still waiting in the wings, so at least you didn't get the last slot of the day. Thank you very much for your help with the inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My lady, our next witness is Richard Davis. My lady, please can the witness be sworn or affirmed?
Thank you.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Davis, I'm sorry we've kept you waiting so long. Last witness of the day.
Not at all. My lady.
Shadi.
Can you state your full name for the record, please?
Richard Davis.
Thank you. Now, you have provided the inquiry with a witness statement. The document reference number for that is INQ 000527722. It is dated the 10th of December 2024. Is that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you. Now, by way of professional background, if I could just ask you to set that out, you joined Welsh Government in 2012, is that correct?
Correct.
And that was after a 30-year career in the British Army,
Yes.
is that right? You were in fact awarded an MBE in 1997, and you were also awarded an OBE after commanding an infantry battalion from 2003 to 2006, is that right?
That's correct.
You attained the rank of Lieutenant Colonel,
I did.
and you have served as a senior civil servant for a number of years, and you set out the details of your service at paragraph 6 of your witness statement. What was your role during the pandemic?
My role was the lead government official within a group called the Critical Equipment Requirement Engineering Team, known locally as CERET.
Thank you. And CERET was in fact run or chaired by your colleague James Davies, is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
But you continued to have a leading role within that organisation.
I was the senior civil servant within that group.
And what is your role now?
So I've semi-retired, and I left the Ceret role, worked for a number of years supporting the Tata transition, and now I'm looking at a number of projects within Welsh Government, including a thing called the National Manufacturing Institute.
Thank you for setting that out. You address in your witness statement the workings of Ceret. Before we come on to that, you've also very helpfully provided an overview of two organisations that were part of Ceret, Industry Wales and Life Sciences Hub, so we'll briefly touch on that if that's all right. Industry Wales is the trading name of the Sector Development Wales Partnership Limited, which is a company established by Welsh ministers as at 29th January 2013, is that right?
Correct.
And its role is to advise Welsh ministers about the Welsh manufacturing sector to support engineering, technology and manufacturing businesses in Wales, and to support the Aerospace Wales Forum, Net Zero, Industry Wales, Technology, amongst other things, a list of responsibilities. You described that Industry Wales played a leading role within Ceret. What was Industry Wales's part to play within Ceret?
Okay. Just to go back in terms of concept, the situation at the time, we only had the 3 forums. You mentioned Net Zero Industry Wales. During the pandemic, we only had support to the automotive, aerospace and technology connected. Net Zero Industry Wales came on a little bit later. The key for Industry Wales was in fact an individual, was James Davis. And James Davis, who I would refer to, I continue to refer to as a captain of industry. He was the chief executive of Industry Wales, having completed a significant period with the Japanese automotive component company. He came into us, he was recruited specifically by Welsh Government to give that unfettered advice to the minister and support the manufacturing base. So James led Ceret, led Industry Wales, and I acted in support of him.
And on occasions when he was unable to chair meetings, for example, you would perform that role?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And vice versa.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Life Sciences Hub provides support and guidance to develop life sciences innovations and bring them to the front line for use in the health and social care sector in Wales. Is that an accurate description?
Yes, it is. The way to describe them would be as a front door for that vital sector. And if a company was interested in life sciences, the Life Sciences Hub would look after them and show them what was available within Wales, and they still do very well.
Turning then to Ceret, which is the key focus of your witness statement, you tell us at paragraph 56 that you received a verbal confirmation from the Minister for Economy to bring industry and the NHS Shared Services Partnership together to support their supply chain, and that you acted immediately. And the first formally recorded meeting minutes of Ceret are dated the 20th of March 2020. Are you telling us there that you played a key part in fact, setting Ceret up?
Yes.
Yes. And you describe Ceret as being most active between that date, March 2020, and June 2020. And it was wound down then in the autumn of 2021, is that right?
Yes.
And its final meeting took place on the 29th of June 2021. When Ceret was first set up, what was its initial focus?
So we had because of James Davis and because of my colleagues, we had a very good understanding of the manufacturing base in Wales. And the Welsh manufacturing base is supply chain. We had no original equipment manufacturers. It's all supply chain supporting larger companies. What was very clear was that manufacturing base wanted to help. They wanted to do what they could for Wales, for the rest of the UK, and were prepared virtually to do anything, and they came to us saying, what can we do?
Sorry, just pausing there. You say they came to us. Are you referring there to Industry Wales, or are you referring to Seret?
So in terms of initially, we put out we were talking in mid-March and getting to know the situation as the tempo increased. We then had the ventilator challenge coming out from the UK government. And then we had a whole series of calls to action from James Davis, from the Life Sciences Hub, and from the First Minister, saying, what can you do for us? Can we find a local answer to a local problem?
Right. And those approaches from local manufacturers who you describe as offering their services and wanting to do whatever they could, those were in response to those calls to action, or did they predate those calls to action?
Some predated them. I took phone calls from some of the larger companies, particularly GE Aviation or Airbus, saying, what can we do? But on the whole, they came to us via the triage system, which I'll explain later.
The terms of reference for Seret were not settled until November 2020. Why was that?
We had some draft terms of reference, which we wrote in April and May. To be absolutely honest, I didn't realise that they were not formalised until the thing was almost over, until the November.
Can we have them up on screen, please? They are at INQ 000. Oh, there we are. Thank you ever so much. Terms of reference, governance arrangements, and lessons learned. So by the time the formal terms of reference were settled, you were in a position to draw together some lessons learned.
Yes, we were.
Based on your experience in the pandemic. We see there on page 1 the 4 procurement routes. Route 1, existing supply base, straightforward procurement. Route 2, existing supply base, some minor restrictions on supply. Route 3, supply limitations, requires manufacturers to adapt processes. And Route 4, supply does not exist. You tell us in your witness statement that the focus of Seret was on routes 3 and 4. When Seret was first set up, was it set up with a view to assisting with routes 3 and 4, or was it set up with a different purpose in mind?
It was set up to support the Shared Services Partnership and support the Emergency Coordination Centre. So those 4 routes became clear as we developed the sort of modus operandi of how we worked.
Right. And can you explain the interplay between the work of Seret and the Ventilator Challenge UK?
So the Ventilator Challenge was initiated by a gentleman called Dick Elsey from Innovate UK. We worked very closely, or James in particular worked very closely with Mr. Elsey. And the Ventilator Challenge, it initially started to gain momentum with the manufacturers in Wales, or the manufacturer across the whole of the UK. But it became very clear that we could do much more. And we stepped back from supporting the Innovate UK momentum by looking what we could do ourselves and support the Shared Services Partnership. That's where the discussion started with other suppliers, what else was needed from the Shared Services Partnership.
And we've heard from NWSSP this afternoon that Seret would be provided with something called the critical equipment list.
Yes.
And was that the basis of the work that Seret then went on to do?
So the context of this was we initially set up to see what we could do for the Ventilator Challenge. We weren't needed, but it was very clear that we were needed internally in support of the Shared Services Partnership. And that really started the calls to arms, the emails out to all the companies. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, can you help us? What can you do to support us? And in terms of the ventilator challenge, that went really back to the UK government, and we stayed with routes 3 and 4 for shared services partnership.
In terms of assisting NWSSP, we've heard about the triage role performed by Life Sciences Hub. In terms of the wider work of CERET, assisting manufacturers in switching their facilities to PP production, what was the split of work between assisting NWSSP with triage and technical assessment, and that, I suppose, outward-facing role of helping companies who wanted to take part in the PPE effort, if I can call it that?
No, absolutely. So in terms of the demand, the pure demand came from the Shared Services Partnership. They had that critical equipment list, and we were trying to help them fill any demand or any deltas that existed. To do that, we had 2 initial points of entry for companies. One was Business Wales, and the other one was the Life Sciences Hub. In very simple terms, the life science companies tended to go to the Life Science Hub. Anybody else from any other sectors would go to Business Wales, saying, I'm Dickie Davis Limited, I'd like to help you with the procurement of glasses, what can I do? That then came through the funnel, and it became very clear, very quickly, that the Shared Services Partnership could not deal with the sheer number of people coming through. Life Sciences Hub came forward and said, we can help you with the triage. Life Sciences Hub were integral to CERET. Shared Services Partnership were integral to CERET, etc. My own team was obviously integral. And as we came down the filter, was Dickie Davis Limited what he says he is on the tin? Do they make widgets? We put them through Credit Safe. If they needed certification, if they said that I can produce a widget, but it wasn't, I've produced this is a prototype, we then put them to the Surgical Material Testing Laboratory. If they were who they say they were, and they were producing what they said they would, and it was certified straight on to Shared Services Partnership. If they needed some further help from us, we passed it on to our regional colleagues or our innovation colleagues who could bring market intelligence, finance, equipment to support them changing their supply process to support the NHS.
Thank you. Now, in terms of budget, CERET, you had a delegated authority to utilise the budget of up to £5 million, was
Yes.
that right? And there was additional funding to support CERET, and that came from a £6 million Welsh Government Innovation Fund.
Yes.
You show us at paragraph 49 at page 15 of your witness statement how that funding was ultimately spent. That's INQ 000527722, page 15. There we are. So some was spent on continuous positive airway pressure or CPAP devices, and we'll come back to that in a moment.
Thank you.
Some for supporting volunteers making scrubs, funding for transport to deliver materials. Some was spent on creating a back-to-work video, reminding people to wear masks, to adhere to social distancing, and so on. And £100,000 was given to Industry Wales to reimburse Industry Wales for its purchases of CPAP devices and oximeters. The innovation work that was done, you you describe at paragraph 152 of your statement a number of initiatives in which Seret was involved. One example you give is the repurposing of technology used in financial services as a COVID-19 symptom tracker. And in this example, the role of Seret was effectively to bring together two companies so that they could develop a new product. Is that in very simple terms?
Yes,
what Seret
absolutely.
did? You also talk about clear masks. There was a need for these so that those with hearing impairments would be able to see the faces, the facial expressions of care and healthcare staff. Some work was done on this. It was ultimately taken forward by UK government. So is it right that Seret had to pause its work in this regard?
Yes, I go back to my earlier statement. My driving force was the Shared Services Partnership. They would turn to me and say, I wanted gowns or visors or masks or whatever. I was working to their demand.
Now, in terms of the success of Seret, you're not able to tell us, are you, how many contracts NWSSP awarded to companies that had received assistance and support from Seret?
No.
Would it have been helpful to have access to that kind of information?
No, and I say that because I was supporting, helping, guiding the Welsh manufacturing base to support the NHS and the Emergency Coordination Centre. They were the people who were saying that we needed that particular equipment, the visors, the masks, and whatever it happened to be. So, it didn't really matter what the equipment was or what the issue was. We were there to support them.
So your measure of success was if NWSSP said they needed more help, that help was provided. Once they were satisfied, you felt the job was done?
My measure of success is the fact that we never ran out of vital, critical equipment. And also, on a personal level, the companies proud of what they achieved. The Royal Mint producing the visors, Penderring Whiskey producing hand sanitizers, etc. But in terms of my personal measure of success, it's did we ever run out of equipment? And the answer was no.
It's very hard to quantify or trace back how much of the credit for Wales not running out of equipment is due to the work of Seret, isn't it?
Very hard, very hard. Almost impossible.
This may be a difficult question for you to answer, but should Seret or an equivalent be set up again in the event of a future pandemic?
Yes.
Why?
Because you've got an ability to talk to the manufacturers. You've got an awareness of what is being made, produced, or could be made. You've got an awareness of the quality of manufacturing in Wales. Can we use those companies? Can we use those facilities? Can we use those HE or FE facilities for innovation to support whatever the demand of a pandemic? So yes, I would absolutely suggest that a similar grouping should be set up.
NWSSP have told us that they did not observe any noticeable impact on the availability of PPE in Wales as a result of the work of Seret and the allocation of grants to manufacture in order for them to repurpose or manufacture PPE. A reason that is given is the time that it took for new items to gain regulatory approval, for example, and the fact that the majority of buying activity took place early on in the pandemic. That is the view of NWSSP. It has been caveated by acknowledging that British Rototherm, which did
Yes.
receive assistance from Seret, subsequently received several contract awards and worth a total of £15.5 million. That is a notable success there.
Yes.
And also that the domestic production of hand sanitizer was something, although not strictly PP, that was a success
Oh, good.
story
Okay.
coming out of Seret. In light of that comment from procurement services, how do you think domestic manufacturers in Wales can quickly, swiftly switch their capabilities to PPE during a pandemic?
How could they?
If indeed you think they can.
The strategic answer to that is manufacturing is in our DNA. We have got a significant number of highly skilled engineering companies with a lot of innovators at the universities, at the colleges, etc., etc. I think as long as we have an awareness of what the manufacturing processes are and what is required, and there is a willingness to change their processes, and there may be some form of remuneration required for them to change, it could be done again, and I'm sure it would be.
I suppose that the slight challenge to your evidence would be, well, an awful lot of work went into supporting Welsh manufacturers in encouraging them to switch their capabilities to supplying PPE. NWSSP has said, with some notable exceptions, it didn't bear fruit in time. Was it worth doing?
I mean, I read that statement, and if I'm absolutely honest, I was very disappointed and rather saddened to read that statement, mainly because I had colleagues from the Shared Services Partnership with me throughout the period, and they also sat next to me when we won an award for the collaboration and the timeliness between the two of us. So I was a little surprised. I'm glad that they've put the caveat about Rototherm. There are a number of other companies, and I'm very glad for the likes of Gower Gin and GE and BCB, etc., that their work has been acknowledged.
You mentioned the award. You're quite right to raise that. That award was in relation to ways of working, collaboration, good communication, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, you
Thank
have, yeah.
In the time remaining, I'm going to turn to Micronel and the spend on CPAP components, if I may. Seret did carry out some early work, early in the pandemic, in an attempt to ensure that Wales had critical equipment available. I suppose cutting to the chase, Seret placed an order for 10,000 component parts that were intended to be used in the building of CPAP machines. Is that right?
Correct.
At paragraph 128 of your statement, you say Seret made a risk-based decision to commit to purchasing 10,000 component parts before the exact forecast demand was known in view of global demand. So is it correct that you didn't, at the time of committing to that purchase, I say you, Seret, didn't have a definitive decision from the NHS as to the numbers of CPAP machines or ventilators that they thought were needed?
So it was I made that decision. And yes, that is correct. We did not have a demand. So this is the mid-March, beginning of the third week, UK Ventilator Challenge going on. This is that timescale with extraordinary pace and tempo that you're only too aware of. But it was I that took that decision to go for the 10,000.
And 10,000, why that number?
So the background to this was we had seen the demand from the UK ventilator challenge. We had a significant number of very senior clinicians in Wales saying that the CPAP device, the non-invasive ventilator, was going to be the ventilator of choice because you could take it from home to the hospital and then back to home. We had significant discussions between our innovation colleagues and the Cabinet, the UK Cabinet Office, about numbers, and there was discussions of 15 to 30,000 ventilators being needed. We needed a high number. I said 10,000. 10,000 blowers and circuit boards to make those things.
Parts.
Component
Yes.
parts, correct.
Subsequently, you revised that position and reached the conclusion that, in fact, you only needed 2,000 of
Yes.
those components. Several steps were explored to mitigate the financial loss. Ultimately, the cost of those parts was written off, I think, to the tune of just over £500,000.
565,000, yes.
Was this the only write-off for which Seret was responsible?
Yes.
Looking back, how could this situation have been avoided? Or indeed, do you take the view that it was unavoidable at the time and the circumstances?
Would I make the same decision again, knowing what I know now? Clearly not. But would I make the same decision knowing what I knew then? Yes, I would. Because the numbers, it was that extraordinary period where the fatality numbers were going up by the hour. We were trying desperately to get a ventilator system that worked and could be relied upon. There was a local company that had designed this. We had the ability to make this via either with this company called C.R. Clark or with Panasonic that was certified, and I took that risk-based decision. In hindsight, thank God, it wasn't necessary, or they weren't necessary.
I'd like to just turn to lessons learned, recommendations and reflections now. You offer some personal reflections in your witness statement. You've reflected on, I think you've told us already, on the closeness of teams, and you say that was extremely valuable. You reflected on trust and good teamwork. You also speak to the importance of arm's-length bodies, and I'd like you to just clarify what you mean by this. Governments need arm's-length bodies and vice versa to ensure truth is brought to power based on sound information and intelligence. What do you mean by that in very concrete terms?
Ministers need to hear what is really going on. And it takes a certain civil servant and a certain experienced individual to be able to tell ministers that that is not right or this is the way things are actually happening. Arm's length bodies, and in particular James Davis, was very, very good at giving an unfettered view. They could say what they wanted to say to the ministers. And in my experience of dealing with a number of economy ministers, they appreciate actually hearing it. And same for the Life Sciences Hub too.
Thank you for answering my questions. My lady, those are my questions for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. I think it's now Mr. Dale.
Thank you, my lady. Mr. Davis, I ask questions on behalf of FEMO,
Yes, sir.
the Federation of Ethnic Minority Healthcare Organizations, and I have just one short topic. Paragraph 27 of your witness statement outlines Seret's structured approach to procurement during the pandemic, particularly focusing on developing and delivering solutions under routes 3 and 4, which involved adapting processes where supply limitations existed or created new supply routes where none existed. Could you clarify, please, how equality considerations, particularly for Black and ethnic minority healthcare workers, were factored into these innovative procurement strategies to ensure that PPE and clinical equipment procured met diverse needs?
The answer is no, sir, I can't. Because my direction was from the Shared Services Partnership. So they would say to me, I am short of gloves or visors or what it happens to be. And I would then use my team to go and find them. So your question was not within my, clearly I was aware of the moral responsibility and the legal responsibility without any doubt at all, but I was doing what I was required to do by the Shared Services Partnership.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Ms. Parsons.
Thank you, my lady. Good afternoon, Mr. Davis.
Good afternoon.
I ask questions on behalf of the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice Cymru. Two short topics. The first topic is the procurement of ventilators and CPAPs.
Yes.
Insofar as ventilators are concerned, we understand that CERET was originally set up in response to the ventilator challenge, but that it ended up supporting NHS Wales with key healthcare resources such as PPE.
Yes.
Given CERET's expertise, and in particular manufacturing expertise, do you think it was a missed opportunity not to use CERET for the purpose for which it was set up, namely ventilators for Wales and the UK more widely?
No, I don't.
Is that simply because they weren't needed or for some other reason?
Because the Shared Services Partnership had the demand. I could then, with routes 3 or routes 4, I could use my understanding of the manufacturing base to support their demand. That we initially looked at the CPAP, then it became clear it was PPE and other innovation products. So it was the initial question had passed by then.
Thank you. You've touched on CPAPs, and I want to ask you about that now. Could we have up on the screen, please, INQ 000 509 323? It's an email chain, Mr. Davis, between James Davis and yourself, amongst others.
Yes.
Could we go, please, to page 7 of that chain? So it's the penultimate email. Get that up on the screen if we can. Yes, this is an email, as you'll see, Mr. Davis, from Rhys Thomas. That's Dr. Rhys Thomas.
Yes.
To your colleague James Davis. And as you will see, he describes positive results of a prototype CPAP trial developed by himself in March 2020. I'm just going to read out the 2 paragraphs in bold. I believe we have a proof of concept, but this also supports our strategy in that CPAP should be the mainstay of treatment for these patients, not an ITU ventilator. COVID patients have a complete failure of oxygenation, but unusually have very compliant lungs. I have never seen this pattern before, but CPAP is the ideal tool for improving oxygenation. Next paragraph. This has a number of advantages in that you don't need specialist staff, no ITU ventilators, and it reduces contamination in the room as it filters the air as it works. It has 3 viral filters, 99.9% effective, better than any face mask. This is quite important as the staff currently don't have PPE. Mr. Davis, the inquiry's heard evidence over the course of this module that CPAPs were cheaper than ventilators, and this email clearly envisages CPAP as an important piece of equipment. Could you, or should you, have done more to secure CPAPs, or were you simply following orders, as it were, and told that they weren't needed?
So first of all, I am not a clinician in any shape or form. And the advisors, the Welsh NHS advisors, have, via the Shared Services Partnership, had said that we don't need the CPAP device to the quantity that we initially thought. So I am going to run with what Shared Services Partnership told me.
Thank you. Next and final topic, please, and it's about your lessons learnt. You've in fact already been asked about it, but can I ask that you consider again paragraph 158 of your statement? Governments need arm's-length bodies and vice versa to ensure that truth is brought to power based on sound information and intelligence. We know what truth being brought to power means, typically saying something uncomfortable to those in authority. Can you help us with examples of what you had in mind? What was so uncomfortable that ministers needed to hear whilst you were at Seret?
No. I think that is out of the scope of my role as Seret. My view is that we need to tell ministers as much detail as we possibly can about either good news or bad news. But in terms of the Seret and your specific question, I think that's not for me to answer.
Well, I'm just asking you about your lessons learnt.
So in terms of my lessons learned...
On truth being brought to power, forgive me, your words, not mine, Mr. Davis. So what does that mean then, in context?
So it is very, very important. Sorry, I have confused my answer slightly. It is very, very important that we tell honestly and openly and quickly those points that are concerning, in terms of production or demand. We tell the ministers what is really going on. And if they are not listening, or they haven't been given the opportunity to listen, find other ways of telling them, and that's where the arm's length bodies come in as so important.
Thank you. Just the last few words of your lessons learnt. Truth needs to be brought to power based on sound information and intelligence. What does that look like? Did you have access to that sound information and intelligence, or is your point that you didn't have it and should have done?
No. Sorry, I now understand your question. That intelligence was coming to us from the Shared Services Partnership in terms of the demand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. Those are my questions. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you very much, Ms. Parsons. That completes the questions we have for you, Mr. Davis. Whatever conclusions I reach, I've got no doubt that the work you and your colleagues did had to be worthwhile and had to be worth a go, and I suspect I may well find it did prove some degree of success, whatever your other colleagues may have said to your disappointment. I'm tempted to ask you what it's like to work for a government as opposed to serving in the army, but I'd better not go there either because I don't want to embarrass you. So thank you very much for your help, and we shall adjourn now until 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you, my lady.